Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Today we're joined by Esther Peralez Dieckmann, the Director of the Office of Women's Policy in the County of Santa Clara. Esther, thanks for being on Democratic Television.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Well, there's a lot of things for us to talk about. Your office has done a lot of great work and showed almost a roadmap of things that we need to do to make our community a better place. Before we go there, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about you and find out where you're from, where'd you grow up, what were some of your interesting hobbies?
I'm happy to share that, Steve. I actually am not from the Bay Area. I've been here about 5 years, but I was born outside of Austin, Texas, in a little town called Lockhart. In the 60s, I was born at the time where the Beatles were just hitting the U.S., and it was a great era. And I often think I was born a little too late because I love the 60s. But I grew up in the Austin area at a very interesting time in our community in terms of just what was happening with politics in Texas at the time. We were seeing the emergence of the Raza Unida movement. And that was something that was a big part of my childhood. My parents were activists in the Raza Unida party, which was really the Latino response to the inability of either political party responding to the needs of Latinos. So I remember very young going on marches and protests in Austin, Texas, when things like police brutality were a problem. And I remember being 10 years old and marching on Congress Avenue toward the Capitol with my 4 other brothers and sisters and my mother because we were protesting what was happening in Austin at the time and basically murders of Hispanic people at the hands of law enforcement. Interestingly enough, at this one particular march, we also had the Ku Klux Klan marching down Guadalupe Avenue, and they were both marches were converging at the Capitol. And I just remember at one point somebody said run, and my mom took all 5 of us and we ran to our green LeSabre. We got in the car and the car didn't start. So that was probably the last time that we really spent time at a march where there might have been violence. But my mother was very committed to really looking at how is the political system in this country going to serve Latinos. And I remember she and her cousin would have a lot of discussions and sometimes arguments about politics. I have a cousin who is Maria Antonieta Berriozabal, and she was the first Hispanic elected to the San Antonio City Council. So I remember her distinctly telling my mother, Rosa, you have to really get with the Democratic Party because that is really where we're going to have a voice. It's the legitimate party. And my mother was very adamant that no, we cannot just go with the status quo. We have to find another path that's going to get us where we need to go. So I remember, over several years that dialogue went on. And I think it really shaped my appreciation for the role of politics. Coming from a Latino family in Texas, service in the public sector is a big thing. You were successful if you were working for the city or for the county. So I realized early on that government was always going to play a role somewhere for me. So I went to college, Texas Lutheran University, and also got my master's at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And the first job I had was volunteering for Southwest Voter Registration Education Project because I remember Willie Velasquez as a child. I remember, him coming to our home and having meetings with my parents who were organizers in rural Texas. So I thought, well, I'll go hang out at the office, volunteer, and 2 weeks later I have a job and I'm organizing voter registration projects throughout Texas and eventually Colorado, New Mexico. And so that was another very interesting experience where I really learned a lot about what issues were facing Latinos in very remote areas. I remember being in Sweetwater, Texas, and working with cumulative voting and really looking at new ways that Latinos could gain access into representation politically. So that was just a really exciting time for me in the early 90s. And something that's always been there, but I think I was always pulled back into the idea of working for government because I think while I was doing the organizing and doing different things, people really couldn't say, well, what is Esther doing? What's her job? And it wasn't until I started working for the city of San Antonio that my mother could articulate, hey, Esther's got a real job now, and one that her paychecks are coming regularly. So I went to work for the city of San Antonio and really spent time working with communities. Had also done a lot of work with nonprofits, working with youth, working with women who were coming off of the welfare rolls. And that was something the city of San Antonio was looking very closely at in the late 90s, early 2000. And I really started to see themes in my work in terms of women, because no matter what community I was in throughout the Southwest or in neighborhoods in San Antonio, Texas, leaders in the community always seemed to take the form of women. They were feminine leaders. So while sometimes the face of different movements and different organizations were male, the momentum and the energy really came from women. And that was something that really interested me. And as you begin to work in things like welfare to work, and you really begin to realize who are these women on our welfare rolls and what do they need to get off of these welfare rolls and succeed, you begin to see a lot of themes in their own past with violence, from childhood abuse or domestic violence, addiction, mental health issues. And so I also began to see the complexity of some of these issues and trying to solve some of the social problems that are facing our community today. So I began also looking at work and research with girls in the criminal justice system, and spent some time at the University of Texas Health Science Center looking at short-term interventions with girls in juvenile hall for STDs, dating violence, and really coming to appreciate that the stories of survivors and the strength of women and girls, it's there. You know, if you can look past all of the spots and all of the criminal justice past and sort of the mistakes people make and the many times that people sort of fail and go back to unhealthy habits, the power of women was always something that I could appreciate. So in, I guess it was probably 2004, we started to think about, you know, the future. And my husband, we had been married at that point for about 13 years. He was really wanting to go on for more education. Both of us came from single parent families with mothers who were very strong and, you know, raising a lot of kids. My husband actually comes from 8 children. But he had a dream of also going on to pursue his education. So we had to really make the decision about leaving our jobs and really making the break from Texas because he had a dream of going to either Stanford University, Harvard, or the University of Michigan. So I remember my first experience in the Bay Area came after a couple of months of finding out that I was pregnant with our first child in our marriage. So I remember flying into the Bay Area and Stanford kind of showing us around because they really wanted a Latino in their PhD program in the School of Education. And Jack was very attracted to the faculty there and sort of the ideas and the energy around Stanford. But I remember getting a call on my cell phone from Harvard University. And they said, you know, we're aware you're in California now, but we want to offer you a presidential scholarship, which was amazing for us because Harvard only gives out 1 of 6.
Oh.
So the idea that, you know, this kid from the inner city of San Antonio, from very humble beginnings, you know, extreme poverty, and just a lot of, you know, things in his past and experiences that were very challenging, that you had these major universities looking at him was a dream. So we were very excited about coming to California, the energy and the diversity here. And our son was 6 weeks old when we got to Stanford. And it really opened up a complete new experience for us. And just looking around at politics and the Latino community and how different it was here in California from Texas. So I was very fortunate to come across the job posting for the Office of Women's Policy. And I applied and was hired as the director in 2005. So at the time, my son was 6 months old, and it was really hard. It was really hard, and I came to appreciate this whole work-life balance where you have to leave a baby, and you're trying to make a career, and you're trying to do well at a job.
So explain a little bit more about the Office of Women's Policy. Where is it housed? How is it funded? And what are the issues that you take on there?
Well, for me, the Office of Women's Policy is the dream job. It is a job where I get to work on issues affecting women and girls, which is something I've always been committed to. It is part of the county structure. Our office is considered a special department in the Office of the County Executive. So, you know, the office was established in 1998 when Supervisor Blanca Alvarado really made the push for looking at the needs of women and girls. And so I came at a time where the office had been vacant for about a year. So it was a really good time to come in and really look at what is it that women are asking for in Silicon Valley. At the same time, the county was asking a lot of questions about female offenders. You know, what was happening to women in the jails, women in the criminal justice system. So while this office has historically looked at a number of issues for women, at the point where I came in, we really began to look at what was happening to women and girls in the criminal justice system. And that really began the work in our county jail system that we continue today. And looking at what are the life circumstances and the pathways that bring women to jail, what is their experience in jail, and what kinds of programs and services do we have for them, and what happens to them when they leave jail.
And had this kind of study been done elsewhere? Is this something where you're working on previous research, or is this all original?
The field of research on women offenders is relatively new, and there's a significant amount of research done in prisons, but very little research done at the county jail level. So we really wanted to get a sense of, is what's happening in the jail a mirror of what's happening in our prisons and at the federal and state level? And what we found is a lot of common themes. You have a lot of women of color who are young mothers of children, typically under the age of 5. Lots of low-level nonviolent crimes, substance abuse, petty theft, forgery, crimes that we call crimes of survival. So as we looked at our jail population, which is roughly 600 women on the average, we started to ask ourselves, you know, what is the impact of having these women here? When you consider all of the children that they represent and the fact that most of those women are single heads of household, you start thinking about what's happening to those kids while the women are behind bars. And what is happening while they're there to prepare them to go back to those children and resume their responsibilities. So when we started talking to the women, we realized that the cycle of incarceration was already being developed. The women were saying things like, my kids are starting to get in trouble, I'm really worried about them. My relatives are telling me my son is depressed, or my daughter's not doing well in school. So, you know, the understanding of what happens when you incarcerate a woman for us became very real. And we realized there's actually much more impact to a community when a woman is in jail. And that's been the heart of the work that we've done.
Well, we're going to take a break right now, but when we come back, I'd like to talk more about what are some potential solutions that have been identified and ways to alter that path so that women are much better able to survive and thrive.
Great.
We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Pierluigi Oliverio, City Council member from the City of San Jose, and I'm asking you today to become involved in your local Santa Clara Democratic Party. When we act locally, we have the ability to change things on a larger level, and that organization exists today for you to volunteer, whether it's small or large, small time commitment, big time commitment, but the idea is there's an organization ready to put you in to work to assist with the democratic ideals, whether it be healthcare, whether it be environment, whether it be independence from foreign oil, having an economy that rises everyone. Things that we believe are good for our society locally are great at the national level. And now, coming up as an election year, this is the right time to get involved. So, put your best foot forward and pick up your telephone and call 408-445-9500. Do it today, do it soon, do it now. Let's help the Democratic Party. Thank you.
Esther, before we get back into talking about the Office of Women's Policy, I'd like to get to know you a little bit more. One thing, you have several children, and I realized your second child you adopted. What made you want to adopt another child, first one you didn't adopt?
Right. After our first child, who is my son Joseph, and parenthood has been wonderful. My husband is formerly a public school teacher in the Edgewood School District of San Antonio, Texas, and has worked, you know, throughout his career to look at teaching practices that really support minority students, limited English proficient students. And his work at Stanford has really focused on helping train teachers in mathematics, education, so that they can really understand and appreciate sort of the differences and the special needs and talents and strengths of Latino students or students for whom English is not their first language. So he does a lot of teacher training, and his passion and work around that, I think, is very similar to my own passion about women. And so we were foster parents early in our marriage, simply because of some of the work I was doing. And we had one young Latina who we couldn't place and had about a year before she aged out of the foster care system. So that was another experience that, when we wanted to expand our family, we really had to ask ourselves, do we try biologically to have another child, or do we try to open up our home to a child that's already here? And so the interesting thing was we had signed up with an adoption agency, but 2 weeks before May 1st of this year, we got a call from a friend of the family whose daughter was having a baby, and she had made the decision to give up the child. So we found ourselves in the process of adoption, faster than we had expected. So Benjamin was born May 1st, and we went through the whole adoption process, and which was relatively quick, but he came into our family, and he is the biggest blessing, and really completes, the family. So I'm the mother of 2 boys, and my husband and I are, a little long in the tooth, we feel. I mean, our children came late in life, after the career had already been established. So it's a challenge now to be older parents and to sort of now look at this new opportunity that impacts both of our jobs and both of our careers, because now we have to balance picking up children, babysitting,
Real world stuff.
Yeah, and it's often a bigger challenge for women, to be honest with you. I think there's some degree of flexibility with my husband's work, fortunately, but I find a lot of times being challenged with the decision about, do I put my family first or do I need to put my job first right now? So I think that's part of the challenge, but it's been wonderful having him in our lives.
Well, that's great, and another thing to appreciate about you. We were talking earlier about women who were incarcerated and many times there for crimes of survival or necessity,
Right.
and trying to find out what can we do to prevent them from needing to go down that path in the first place.
Right.
Is your office working with the Department of Corrections and others to try to come up with programs, things in the community that would be helpful?
We are. I mean, I think part of the reason why we are doing so much work is the support that we've gotten through the county and through the Department of Correction to really want to take an interest and to really want to focus on what is happening with female offenders and what do we need to do so that we can break the cycle of incarceration. So we've done a lot of innovative things in addition to really pushing for additional programs and support that really meet their needs. We look at some specific issues. For example, one of the things we discovered was that 85% of the women in county jail are actually victims of violence, and about half of them experience childhood physical and sexual abuse. So we, in our office, started looking at different ways we could partner with organizations. And one of the things that we're really proud of is our Domestic Violence Information and Resource Collaborative. It's an effort that we coordinate, and it brings together people from Superior Court, judges, personnel there, groups in the community, the South Bay Labor Council, public defender, district attorney, and all of the stakeholders in domestic violence who come together and do these panel workshops that talk about what is domestic violence, how does it affect the community, how to report it, how to get help.
It's such a stigmatized area, though. How do you get women to turn out for that kind of an event?
I think the challenge is, how do you get people to talk about the issue of domestic violence, first of all? And what we find works is to connect with partners, because in reaching women, the thing that really works is talking to other women. So we try to work with organizations who are working in specific communities and that have connections and can bring in populations of people, neighborhoods, to these workshops. And we find that has been a really successful strategy. And we also go to different places. One of the things that we did in the last 2 years is we've begun doing these workshops in homeless shelters. The first shelter workshop we had actually drew about 200 homeless individuals, where they were able to get information and resources, fill out applications for food stamps, get legal advice, information on restraining orders. And last year, for the first time, we actually took the team into Elmwood Jail here, and we did a workshop for 150 women. And it was really successful. Housing, jobs, those were the big demands, and we had providers there to try to link them with services so that when they're released, they can be connected and get some immediate support.
So your feedback from that, from the women that participated, was strong?
It was very strong because a lot of times these women are not aware of the legal system that's happening around them. A lot of them are already going through the court process or perhaps have children in protective custody. So they needed an opportunity to sort of get their bearings and speak with people who have the information and resources locally. And ironically, we began to look at batterer services through our office because, we can sort of ask the question of a community, why don't women leave? And really explore that. But the question that we're not asking is what's happening to the men who are battering. And often what we're finding is these are men who have also been exposed to violence very early in life, and there's very little for them other than private therapy and organizations that exist that support men in general, but we are finding there's a big lack of services for the men.
And so men who are needing help are really faced with almost no options.
Right.
They have to either find a mentor that might be able to help them or just kind of hope they get it together. It seems like that would be a good area to work in.
Right.
I don't know if the Office of Women's Policy would get involved in that, but it seems like it should, in the sense of this is the cause of a lot of the problems that you're seeing.
Right. We often use family violence to talk about domestic violence because it isn't just the woman who's affected. And in most cases of domestic violence, it is the woman who is the victim, but children are being impacted. There is usually a husband in the family. So the question is, how do we help the entire family? And what are the resources to support that? So one of the exciting things that we did very recently was we held our first workshop in the jail for males. So about 120, 130 male offenders in Elmwood Jail. They had an opportunity to connect with the same information and to talk to other men who have been incarcerated and have sort of moved on and been successful, and kind of to see that there is another life beyond life in jail.
You guys are doing a lot of stuff. One of the concerns that I have as you're speaking is that you're part of a county structure that is just getting horrible funding cutbacks from the state and from property taxes and things like that.
Right.
I also understand your office has a very, very small staff. It's you and a few other superhero women that are doing all this stuff and motivating others.
Right. Our office is very small, and we're hoping that, with support and with the leadership we have now in the County Board of Supervisors, that will change over the next few years. Certainly, we're sensitive to the idea that there is very little money right now in government, but the demands and the needs of women continue to grow. We are impacted very heavily by all the budget cuts that happen at every level of government. But in the absence of giving us more money and more staff, part of what we're demanding is accountability in government. There are funded resources. There are drug and alcohol resources that are there, mental health resources. And the question is, are they coordinated and are they connected with the populations in our institutions, in our jails? So a lot of our work is looking at systems and how to be more effective in closing the gaps that women fall through, and just demanding for a better allocation of the resources that we do have so that women's needs and their specific interests are met.
Everybody has a stake in the work you're doing. Are you finding that either the corporate sector or the philanthropic sector is aware of what you're doing and supportive of that?
I think so. I had the opportunity earlier in the last 24 months to be part of LeaderNet. And one of the things that I learned from that LeaderNet training through Working Partnerships USA and the South Bay Labor Council was that there are lots of partners there. And we sort of heard the term, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. And the experience there really opened up my mind to the idea that there are a lot of partners out there in the private sector, in the non-governmental sector. And again, in the absence of resources and money, you have to really look for strategic partnerships. So that was an experience that was also sort of helpful for me to realize that if we're more strategic and sort of more focused about the work that we're doing, we can still make progress. And then I had the opportunity over the past week to be part of the Global Women's Leadership Network, Women Leaders for the World program, where 19 women from all over the globe came together to talk about the projects and issues that were impacting their community and how we as women leaders can advance our projects and sort of create the change that we want to see in the community. It was a very powerful experience. And again, what is the thing that we need to focus on as leaders so that we can move forward? So it was a fabulous week, and lots of new ideas came out of that as well.
We have about 2 minutes, but let me follow up on that. What are the things that we should be looking forward to that give you a sense of we can make a difference?
I think overall, the big lesson this week is when you invest in women and girls, you get a much higher return. Opportunity for women is not as high as it is for men, and that is a fact across the globe. So what we're finding through books such as Holding Up Half the Sky, the new book that everyone's talking about, is this idea that small investments or big investments in women and girls are yielding phenomenal results. And so part of what we want to do is just to keep encouraging people to think, as we look at the economic recovery and the future, women and girls are a big part of that. And the more we invest in them, the faster we get to that.
Well, of course, now I have to ask you, how can we get in touch with you? Do you have a website that you could share with us?
Sure. Our website is pretty simple. You can just type in owp.sccgov.org. Or you can just Google Office of Women's Policy, Santa Clara County, and our office will come up on the screen. And you can also call our number, which is area code 408-299-5142.
Well, great. You've shared a lot with us, both personally, and I admire both you and Jack for all the work that you've done and the work you're going to do. And soon we'll have a show and get those kids on it. That sounds great. Thank you very much for being here, Esther.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for watching Democratic Television. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website, sccdp.org. Help make a difference, and we'll see you on the campaign trail.